Hello, Silas here, and I'm back for okay. I'm not back. I'm here. This time we're here just to have a conversation with my good friend Steven. Say what's up to the people.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're all well. I hope you had a good Thanksgiving, and I hope you have some good plans coming for Christmas. I'm really looking forward to it myself.
Yeah, same here. I might talk about that later, but we have some plans together. We've had several conversations about different topics, and we've been having some ongoing series about food and other things, but we've really been looking at getting into some more practical day-to-day type of things, getting into like economics with reading human action. And this is another topic that I think is rather important, rather salient. This is this relationships between men and women, men and men, women and women, guys, gals, and everything else in between, whatever it might be. And to that aspect, Stephen had a book that he was reading before that we actually were thinking of, hey, we're actually going to actually do a series on this, going back with like many of the other series we've done. One of the series on the books that we read, it was Ivory Tower.
Cracks in the Ivory Tower. Oh, the Why We Believe in Gods. That was another one. Yeah. I'm trying to think what
we've done some papers by Marcuse and things like that. Marcuse and
Time magazine article, Fortifying the Election.
That was a fantastic one. Okay, so we do multiple parts, but this one should just be one part. And in this one, before that marriage book that we wanted to talk about relationships, talking about just weddings and marriages and all other places, we're still planning on doing that eventually because I'd done some research in the past about the traditional ideas of marriage here in Kenya with different tribes and things like this. I'd gone to like the National Archives to find things. And then Stephen read this other book on the side, so I was interested. And we were talking about getting that done. But right now, this series is going to be a shorter one, focusing on this book called Marry Him, The Case for Settling for Mr. Goodenough by Lori Gottlieb. And this was written, is it Gottlieb? Gottlieb.
Gottlieb. It means God loves in German.
Okay. I know there's like Doug Gottlieb. He's like a media personality for like Fox Sports News. They're probably not related. Probably a relatively common name. If it's like God loves, that seems like it'd be a relatively common name between the tribe or the elves. If you heard the kerfuffle that went on in the Santa Inc. movie. I really should have done a screen cap of the comments on that. There was some ridiculous comments on that before they shut off the comments. Okay, so Marry Him, The Case for Settling for Mr. Goodenough. I'm just going to read here what's the excerpt here written from Amazon, and then we'll kick it to Stephen and we'll just get into the actual conversation about this thing. Okay, so an eye-opening, funny, painful, and always truthful in-depth examination of modern relationships and a wake-up call for single women about getting real about Mr. Right. You have a fulfilling job, great friends, and the perfect apartment. So what if you haven't found the one just yet? He'll come along someday, right? But what if he doesn't? Or what if Mr. Right has been, well, Mr. Right in front of you, but you passed him by? Nearing 40s and still single, journalist Lori Gottlieb, could be saying that, I'll butcher that name every time we say it here, and started to wonder what makes for lasting romantic fulfillment, and are we looking for those qualities when we are dating? Are we too picky about trivial things that don't matter and not picky enough about the often overlooked things that do? And Marry Him, Gottlieb explores an all too common dilemma: how to reconcile the desire for a happy marriage with a list of must-haves and deal breakers so long and complicated that many great guys get misguidedly eliminated. On a quest to find the answer, Gottlieb sets out on her journey in search of love, discovering wisdom and surprising insights from sociologists and neurobiologists, marriage researchers, and behavioral economists, as well as single and married men and women of all generations. So I'll now kick it to Stephen here. Just a few things before I kick it to Stephen. Just it sounds like an interesting book. Stephen and I have discussed certain topics like this before. The different things, sociology, we're really interested in that. Neurobiology, like we're interested in that kind of things. Marriage and things like that. I think they're things that both of us have a value for the institution of it, even though we're both single at this time. And definitely, it's good to see. I'm interested to see what point of view she'll come to it, because when you talk about certain these things, X is X, and I think problems come because of how we define X. And I think when you actually look at the data, you actually look at the intentions, you actually look at what these things are. Once you actually look at that data, you come to similar conclusions. It's not just, oh, those dirty men in the MGTOW manosphere that just have this whole idea that they demand these things from men. No, there's a reason marriage is the way it is. And there's a reason to develop that way. And I think those reasons are kind of things that most sensible people will agree on once you actually analyze the content. So, Stephen, tell me a bit about your experience finding this book. Why did you find this book? Why did you decide to read it? And what are your general thoughts leading to wanting to have this conversation?
Sure. So for those who don't know, there's a YouTube show, The Roommates. I've watched some of their stuff recently. I'm not seriously into them, but I've watched a few episodes because they've had a bunch of these types of people on to sort of discuss dating, relationships, and all this. And this author actually came on the show and she talked a bit about their book, which I know at least one of the guys ended up reading. And I thought it was a very interesting conversation because I've been talking a lot lately about dating men versus women. And I sort of have some recurring arguments with some of my female friends, especially about women having very particular picky standards. And this author is an interesting case because she's actually a single mother that had a child through in vitro fertilization. But the thing is, she regretted not getting with certain guys and not raising her child with a father and all this. So she wrote this essentially as a cautionary tale. She's basically saying to these younger women, I don't want you going down the same path that I did. But then let's examine, why did I go down that path? What mistakes did I make? And let's interview people who are knowledgeable on this to sort of help steer people in the right direction as well. And we'll get into this as the book goes on, but she talks about being hung up on a lot of things that didn't matter, having to get the perfect guy, passing up guys for minor reasons that in the longer run didn't matter. And then she ended up having to raise a child by herself, which, I mean, I guess ultimately the child, I guess, is older now and, she's doing well career-wise, but she does have a lot of regrets on this stuff. And she wanted to sort of look back, okay, what did I do wrong? And how can I pass this off as a warning to other women? Because a lot of these trends are very common. Like there's a study from Morgan Stanley, you've probably seen it, The Rise of the She Economy, about how there's going to be a record number of single women but that's the thing. But then the question.
A quick time out to the women out there. What do y'all feel about that whole she this, like the she economy, like those type of things of just adding some kind of prefix or suffix to some kind of regular term? I would find it infantilizing. I think if I identified maybe, but I don't really identify so much with these larger groups. But why do people do that? I don't know. It's
the overall theme was to talk about how women have much higher women are making more money and have a more prominent role in the economy than they used to. But it's also talking about how because of this, a lot of these women are single now too. And there are more women single now than historically has been the norm. And a lot of us are wondering why, because you hear a lot of women say, oh, they're no good men. They're no good men. Well, no, there are a lot of men available, but you're writing off most of them. And the question is why. And the author wanted to sort of get into this. And obviously this book is more geared towards women, but I wanted to sort of read it because I wanted to see like, what was the author's take on this? It's obviously very well researched. I mean, we'll get into some of the people. She cites marriage experts, sociologists, behavioral economists, all these people who have done a lot of research in this area. And I'm also wondering, could some of this apply to men as well? And reading this, like, it's gotten me to think about some of my own experiences. And I wonder to myself, what should I look for in a long-term wife, long-term girlfriend, eventually wife, and have I been too picky about certain things? Have I been writing off women for the wrong reasons? So it's gotten me to think about some things as well, which I think is definitely valuable.
Yeah, this was written back in 2011. Do you have any idea how old she was at that time? To say, was she approaching 40 at that time? And then she had a kid.
Yeah, she was, I think, 40. I think she's like early 50s now, if I remember correctly.
And how old was her kid at that time?
That's a good question, actually. I'm not sure. Because I think she was one of those that she was holding out for a guy, but then didn't meet him. So she did in vitro fertilization while she could still have a kid. But,
Yeah. Interesting enough, I know some people who, I think this guy is about 40. The woman, I think, is mid-30s, and they also went the in vitro route, but they were together with the in vitro route. I mean, at least keeping some eggs on the side ready to for the future, and then now they're married, and I think they're going to look to that forward. I imagine they will definitely probably try on the non augmented or non assisted, non technologically, scientifically, medically assisted, not medically assisted pregnancy. You might do that before, but this is just in case. So that's an interesting thing, and it's something that is available, but it's still available to realistically less than 0.001% of the actual population has actual access to this kind of thing. Like this, you are in the 1% if you can even contemplate using in vitro actually abilities, which is it's an ability. It's something that we'll see in the future. So it's just something that's interesting there. But yeah, with this, I think that is a good point. There's definitely a time when initially. This is some time back, over a decade ago. I'm an old man now. Getting into like the manosphere, there was a whole like red pill rage where it got into a point where it was just some annoyance with the general dynamics of relationships, and that's in part due to me moving around to different places, not really being established in a certain place, having you have standards. Standards are good. I think everybody should have standards. If you have standards, I'm for you coming out and opening them and saying, like, yes, these are my standards to do X, Y, Z. That is better than somebody just not having any standards, just not being sure, or having things you are strongly confident about, and then completely saying, oh, I'll get this person to become this thing later. Or I'll completely ignore this one important thing because there's a potential of something that's less important coming from this person. I think a lot of people do that, and in my estimation, just from general observations, is relationships themselves, the way they're structured in the Western society, in the places where most of the people who are listening to this will be coming from, it was intended for you to get to know somebody, a few people at most, if it's even more than a few people, and then it's structured for you to get married, and marriage was structured to be a solid environment in order to reproduce and have more children in that kind of environment. Now you have relationships and dating based on that structure where that's not even a consideration. People who don't want kids at all want that. Like I can have a kid without this, or they'll wonder, oh, I'm having a kid. Why doesn't me having a kid by myself work in this system? Well, society is a system that was developed with kids having that kind of stability that marriage normally has. Traditionally between men and women. It doesn't just have to be men and women. It can be men and men. It can be women and women. But there's certain roles. You know, people say, "Oh, like there's no difference between men and women." But they'll say, like, "Oh, but there's no reason to have like a man and a woman. It's no reason to have two people. Like, you need to have diverse representation." And they say, "Oh, you can just have two men and two women." They're like, what's the diverse representation you're talking about? If we need diverse representation in like workplaces, like if you just have all men in a workplace, that workplace doesn't work well because you have one kind of mindset. But then if you have just all men raising a kid, that's supposed to work a certain way, or if you have all women raising a kid, that's supposed to work a certain way. So even if you have two men, two women as the primary parents, I think those two men and two women probably have friends, relatives, brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, friends like that who can give good examples of different kind of ideas that the men and the women, that the boy or the girl or child might benefit from seeing. So in my estimation, I think this conversation going forward, if I'm not wrong from what I saw with the book, it is primarily focused on that more traditional sense of marriage, of this is something that you come together in order to, you and the person who you might be, you a birthing person, or you and the birthing person have a child, and you raise that child together in a community for that child to be a functional and happy and stable adult in that same community. If you're thinking of marriage for other things, companionship or for getting a visa or all those other arrangements, it still is a simple contract. If that's what you're looking into, this is probably not a book for you. If you're looking into dating to just have poly and have different kinds of sexual and spiritual type of thing, like experience and things like that, this sort of dating that we're going to be talking about, these calculations of Mr. Good Enough, is not something that is going to apply to you. Am I correct with that kind of estimation from what the book is?
Well, I wanted to sort of elaborate on something because, like, my friend, one of the things that I've noticed, one of the issues with her is that she's one of these women who wants a long-term relationship, but she's very hung up on getting a good-looking guy. And I kind of don't understand this, because if the goal is a long-term relationship, why are looks the priority? Like, I come from a family where people stay happily married for a very long time. I mean, my parents have been married 36 years. My mom's parents at the time of my grandmother's death were married 62, going on 63 years. my paternal grandfather died a little after I was born, but if he were still alive or he had lived longer, he and my grandmother would have stayed married. And the book gets into this obviously, but like if I were to interview all these people on why is their marriage successful, nobody's going to say physical attraction. I mean, to me, that's the thing. So I don't get like her hang up on that, because for me, it's like I get focusing on physical attraction if you want to become a pickup artist or you want to recruit, a sugar baby or a boy toy or a trophy wife or something. But if you want like a long-term connection that lasts, it's like you can't really build that off looks. And I think I was probably going to talk to her about it, but I think part of her problem is she finds guys that she just thinks are good looking but aren't interested, and then she hopes to build something out of that. And then when they're not interested, she gets upset. And then what happens? She gets cynical, starts hating life, and it's like, I don't want her and other women to go down that path. But if you keep prioritizing the wrong things, it's like you're just going to keep ending up in the same wrong place. I don't see a way around that.
Yeah. I mean, we are visual beings, so there definitely is a calculus in there that you do that. But as I mentioned, the traditional marriages, you did, first of all, one thing that has changed massively for most of the people listening to this is just the amount of choice you have in potential mates. Like, perceived, okay, let's make a calculation. Perceived choices.
Yeah.
Because if you go on a social media thing, if you go on a dating app and you're just like an average, by any estimation, an average looking female, you go on any dating app in a major city, you will just get probably hundreds of people trying to contact you a day. Now, does that mean every single one of those people is a potential, actual viable mate for marriage? No. Maybe at least 10% of them would actually sleep with you if you actually got back in contact with them in a couple of days. But is that what you're looking for? That's what I said. If that's what you're looking for, the world is your oyster right now. You can get there's no incel females. Let's just put it that way. There's no involuntarily celibate females. Females in the West in general are celibate by choice, which is a positive choice for some people, maybe not positive for other people, whatever. I'm not making an estimation of that. But if you get in a situation when you're actually in dating, even now when you go to dating, if you're in New York City, how many people do you actually have a viable chance to actually date? They time-wise, but you're used to coming to environments where you were living at home, your parents had a lot of influence, they chose and said, okay, you're going to marry this person, because the 5 people that you know around your age group that by the time you're 25 are not actually coupled up, it's very slim. And then by that time you pick between those people are vetted by your family. Your families in many cases know each other already. Both of you have a general idea that we want to live in this area in this kind of way. But then now it's like you live in New York City, you moved from a small town, you just got there like a couple of years back, you're still meeting people, your friends and family are far away. So the people who knew you for your whole development years are somewhere else. The person you meet might be, I'm reinventing myself to this for other person. You're reinventing yourself. The friends that you think are vetting this person don't know half of the important things that make you you. So they might think that this person fits the you that you have shown this person, but isn't truly who you are because you're not yet comfortable enough with even your friends to show them who you truly are. So they introduce you with somebody, and then you start building up this thing. And then once you get to the point where you're going back to start a family, you start regressing back to your experience as a family, your genuine self, and then you start applying those expectations on this person, and it just crumbles. And like, why don't people have these conversations ahead of time? And in that sense, like, I completely agree, and I completely relate to having those struggles of myself, trying to see what do I want as a relationship? Where do I want to live? Who do I want to be with? So I get that aspect. And with looks, that's kind of a simple thing. You can say, well, at least this person is attractive. At least I like looking at this person. But I think good enough is, at least this person isn't repulsive to me. Because from my experience, I've met people who were literally, I used to be speechless just looking at them. And they go, Shik, you are just a vision of just a Godiva, a goddess. And then I would get to know them, and their attractiveness would drop. But I've more experience of the inverse of actually seeing somebody who was just a decent looking person, who wasn't really that appealing physically. But by knowing them, knowing who they were as a person, they become more and more attractive because you actually know that. So in my experience, I don't know if that's an experience for you as well, I've had way more times where somebody was really looking good looking until I knew them, and they just, their attractiveness dropped. The features are still exactly the same, but their attractiveness just dropped. Whereas the inverse has happened a lot more. I'm like, holy shit, you're an awesome person, and this is the container of this awesome person. And I think that's something that's happened to me.
The book will get into this too, and the thing about looks is important because it's not just that people get older and looks fade, but there's something called adaptation, which is the technical term in psychology, and we all understand this to some degree. Like, you walk into an air-conditioned room on a hot day, it feels great. Then you forget the AC's on after a while. If you're hungry or food tastes better, like I love Thomas Sowell's story about he's eating in high-end restaurants, but as a kid, he had a condition. I think it wasn't a grape soda, and he was starving. And he said it was still one of the best tasting things he's had. And objectively, it's not the best food he had, but he was starving, so it tastes a lot better. But it's the same thing with people's. But it's the same thing with people's looks. Like, yeah, you can be enamored by somebody's appearance, but if you saw that person every day for 6 months, a year, you're not going to be like, oh, wow, they're so good looking, because that effect wears off. And that's if they look the same. Then when they get older, looks decline. So that's why I was a little bit critical of my friend just now, because if she's hoping to build some connection based off this guy's hot and it excites me, it's like that never lasts. I mean, even if the guy like stays the same for years. I mean, and it, again, we'll get into this as well, but like even, I mean, a lot of good looking couples look at Hollywood. A lot of them don't last either. So it's like you're trying to build a house on sand, basically. If you're just like you're hoping this guy or woman is good looking, and I'm trying to build something out of that,
One of the go-to features I've liked since I was a kid, though, since I was a lot younger, was just eyes, because eyes in general stay the same. And they say it's the key to the soul. But I mean, yes, there's some coloration that's going to change with that, the surrounding the eyes, of course, the skin and things like. But the eyes themselves will be something, and it's also not just the eyes, the looks that they can give with them. So that's something that I think is something that is decent. So I don't know what else we can say. Is there anything else we have to say, like the intro before we get to it?
Just to add on to your other point, I was going to add to that, and the book gets into this as well, but I think what a lot of people don't realize, they talk about our generation having attention span issues, but all because we're so used to instant gratification and things. And they've made the point in here that a lot of good relationships take time to develop. And I've thought about this, and like I've had a few relationships, but even in terms of like my friendships or people I've known, there's certain people I didn't like right away, but as I got to know them, or we had maybe certain disagreements, but we worked them out, I became closer with them. And I think it's the same thing with a lot of these relationships. Like a lot of the successful marriages in here the people talk about, like, I wasn't blown away by my partner at first, but then, we talked for a bit. We found we had such and such in common. We spent so much time together, and we became closer. And then as we had to deal with certain problems, we became stronger through that. But I think the problem is certain people, women especially, it seems, they expect that sort of excitement, the fireworks, all this. They just expect that feeling to last forever, and it doesn't. I mean, even among successful marriages. So I think people have to be willing to accept that things aren't going to be exciting all the time, and that relates to adaptation. Because I think about when I've started a new job or done something else, it's exciting and everything at first, but that excitement doesn't last forever. And if you're just expecting that excitement to continue forever, you're never going to find it. You're just going to jump in and out of things, hoping something fits some imagined perfect feeling.
Yeah. Now that's a good point on the personal aspect, where for your intentions, and then I think I'll just before we get into it, I think it was good that you mentioned with the parents, because I think that's one thing that is quite key. This is something that I noticed also relatively early in high school. I went to high school in the Washington D.C. suburbia area, the DMV area. It was in Montgomery County. So a lot of people from international backgrounds, first-generation Americans, people who were actually foreigners and things like that. So a relative difference in cultures and things like that. So when you're in high school, people are getting to know each other, hooking up across different cliques and things like that. Yeah. But then now I looked at a lot of people, once they actually started to graduate to college, after college, a lot of the people that married seem to have married people invariably hung out with and married and closer bonds with people who are from similar backgrounds, similar cultural backgrounds to the ones that were raised in, to the ones of their parents. So there's a regress back to that norm that they were used to. Because as I mentioned earlier, that's what you go back to once you start thinking of, marriage as a kid, like what you were used to. Most of us in general, even if we've had adverse childhoods, it's the childhood that we knew, and it's what we're going to use to judge other people based on. Some of us do have parents that went on and told us more about the relationships and things like that and how they came to be. Like with my parents in particular, like I finally asked them some time back about it, and it was more like they were in the village. My dad saw my mom from a distance or something, and then he told he told his older relatives. They got in touch with her older relatives, and then there was some kind of this was a story that Uncle Sam, who was my dad's older brother, was telling me about how it was done back then. It was okay, then you get to know them, then they go and they meet each other before you even get the main introduction to the two kids and things like that. Then there's a process of something like that is not going to happen now. I'm not going to be see some girl on, we're not going to be like walking in Nairobi, or it could happen maybe here in Nairobi. When I'm living in the States, I'm not going to just meet a girl, see a girl from a distance and be like, okay, I need to find out who her parents are, text their info to my parents and have my parents talk to them. And then we build that up. So a lot of people are reinventing the institution of marriage. But there's a big crisis for some people of trying to mash that reinvention, that new kind of idea, that new freedom, that new selection, that new diversity of it into this older idea of something that is so central to civilization, so central to the societies and the cultures that we've experienced in our lived experience and also do exist. So I do understand why there's certain people who are saying we need to keep marriage exactly as is, as the institution is, to maintain society. And I also understand the people who are like, you can't just expect us to hold that kind of structure, because for me personally, that's also a place where I'm divided in those things. And we'll talk about this more in this one and in the next series where we talk about the forms of marriage. Because like for me, that's one thing, like I do not expect, I can't see myself being comfortable with a woman who expects like my parents to pay her parents a bride price for me to marry. Like that's not something that I would do. Yet I know people that I went to high school with that grew up and I thought that's not what they're, and then they're completely comfortable doing that to in their whole relations and things like that. And it's an interesting thing. So without further ado, I think we can jump into it. And the way we do these sometimes with different conversations, in this situation, I haven't read the book at all. Stephen has read the book and he'll just give us different excerpts and walk us through it. And then we'll go back and forth and just talking about it as we go.
Sure. So I was just going to say, I didn't actually write out notes for this. The reason for that is I found there was a ton of quotable stuff in here. And I found that if I was going to write notes, I would just end up copying a lot of the book. And that's kind of a waste. But at the same time, I'm not going to read it verbatim because it's like, I can sort of summarize certain stories that she tells, but then I can cite certain facts cited by experts where they make the case for what they believe. So that's just so, people understand. Okay. All right. So the first section here is called Part 1, How Did We Get Here? Chapter 1 is called The Dating Trenches. So she talks about her friend Julia breaking up with her boyfriend. Her justification was, I just wasn't inspired by him. And then she talks about him being, she talks about he was cute, sweet, very smart. He was kind of unstylish. He was real, non-materialistic, all this. He was more supportive than past boyfriends. And so then she goes on to say, Greg made me feel like I was the most wonderful woman in the world. So then I started thinking, if I'm so wonderful, maybe I should be with someone better. But then better, what does that mean? Well, she focuses on certain weak points that he had. And then, he's not charismatic enough. I want someone more charismatic. Greg was more subtle. She wanted someone who was funnier. He came from a more modest background, so he didn't get certain sophisticated references, all that. And then she basically says, I want my husband to be more of a go-getter. Let's see here. So then the author goes on to tell her that, Greg was nicer than most of them you dated, especially the lawyer who would, quote unquote, forget to call her. They shared similar interests, all that. She goes, but he wasn't inspiring enough. He's just this, nice, regular kind of guy. This is it. This is the guy I waited all my life for. I'm worried I'm going to outgrow him. I'm going to want more. So the author says, more what? And then more like I imagine, he just wasn't husband material. And then with that, another great guy bit the dust. Or did he? What were people looking for in a husband nowadays anyway? All right. That's like the first opening bit. What, did you have any comments on that?
Yeah, that's a key thing right there. Both to the men and the women and the guys, the gals, and everything else in between. If you have parents, if you don't, that's unfortunate. But when was the first time you remember, or have y'all had a good conversation with y'all parents about both their relationship, their marriage, or if it's not a marriage, or if them being, let's say marriage itself, let's focus on marriage here. Did your parents talk to y'all about their marriage or marriage in general, what you should expect or what you would value, positive things to look for? Because that's something that I'll go back and ask my folks how much they talked with their folks. But when you lived in more central places, they were living in the village, their families had been in that village for the entire time. All the people they met were in a similar culture with similar expectations. So people could get to know some of these things just from general observation. But as I mentioned, when I was in high school, these different people were living in high school in one environment, but when you went home, they had different marital structures. They had different reasons outside of the reproduction. The way to to create that environment to reproduce and have kids was achieved in so many different ways. The entry point to that was so many different ways. Some people were probably in planned marriages. Some people had dated several people before. Some people didn't had only had intercourse with that one person that they were married with. And these things do play a part. So yeah. If you take that into mind, how many people are just discovering these things on their own and having to piece it out together where you're going in with certain expectations and the person doesn't have it. And I think in past kind of environments, this general society taught you one way of getting married where you kind of guesstimate and be on the same kind of page as anyone you'd meet in that same environment. But that is no longer the case in the kind of society that most of us live in. And that is a big challenge that I definitely see.
And the book will get into this late. The book will get into this as time goes on, but I think about this with my own parents. Like, even the most successful relationships have multiple disagreements in areas that they have to compromise in. Like, I think they say later in here that something like even successful couples have up to 10 areas of disagreement. Like, there are things that they just have to agree to disagree and sort of work around. So if you're looking for a person who's like a clone of you, and then I've seen that happen too, and then they complain the other person's boring because they're too similar. It's like, well, you can't have it both ways here. If they're too similar to you, you get bored. If there's disagreements, it's like, well, they don't agree with me perfectly. It's like you have to weigh all these trade-offs, which is, are you going to get someone who you mostly agree and there's a few things that you disagree on but aren't deal breakers, or is it going to be someone who's similar to you but then it gets boring because it's basically like another version of you? But most people don't want that either. So I think people just have to be more realistic in expecting that, and that applies to men as well. I mean, this is directed at women, but for the men who think like that, I would make the same argument there.
Yeah, and there are all those little catchphrases like opposites attract, and I always remember used to trying to work with that in high school and things like that. And I thought, no, it's better to say like complementaries work together. Like, okay, this person is stronger at this that I'm really not good at, so I'll use that person. But it's something that you do value. And then later on, as I got more into self-knowledge and things like that, one thing I have found to be unfortunate and to be a primary reason for many of the issues that I see in marriages, in relationships in general, is people aren't confident enough with themselves to get to the point where they actually meet somebody who is that. Because if you're not comfortable with who you are as a person, this whole idea that everybody deserves respect, that's not true. Like, even you personally don't deserve respect from yourself. Like, you shouldn't just respect everything that you do. And anybody that seems to think you owe them respect is not somebody you need to be with. And we know that inherently that respect comes with standards. Respect is earned. And if that respect hasn't been earned, yet it's something that you have to act through, you're going to start despising that person and despising yourself for doing that. And if you're not comfortable with yourself in something, I think if somebody comes to you and seems to be attracted to you for something that you're not comfortable about, you will start resenting them for liking something that you want to get rid of. Or if there's other aspects where you're pretending, you will start saying, this person's either too stupid to see that I'm pretending, or they're actually like, now getting me. I don't know if Kafka trap is the right. No, it's not the right term for this. But now you're being entrapped in this relationship where you have to keep acting. You're both acting back and forth. Then you start wondering: is this person acting? Let me act because they want to let them act as well. And if I call them out on the things that I think they're acting about, so it's just a situation where there's a lot of negativity. When it comes to relationships, all sorts of relationships, whether it's marriage in this sense that we're talking about for leading up to getting together and having kids, or even if it's just like, I just want to have intercourse with 20 people at once, be honest about that. At least come to the point where if you're meeting somebody else in a willing relationship, just be honest. If you don't know something, say you don't know. If you're unsure about something, say you're unsure. If you're hoping to have something in the future, mention the second you know it. There's no need to waste time with all these, like, let me be the person I think they want me to be, when you don't even know who as a person that you are. And that makes no sense.
Sure. All right. So going on. So after the conversation, the author got together with 25 something single women at a bar in Los Angeles and asked why it's hard to find husband material. So their consensus was basically, we'd like a guy, but we don't need a guy. Why should we lower our standards? One woman says, I'd rather be alone than settle. Yeah, I've heard this one a lot. Then she talks about, let's see here. I don't know about you, but I would need to love someone very deeply in order to brush my teeth 2 feet away from where he's taking a dump every morning. It's like, so then they're talking about, did it mean picking a guy or, who has all these qualities, or a guy who's compromising? What would the important ones be? One says, even if he's nice and smart and attractive, I can't be with someone boring. let's see, they have to be curious as well. Someone says, I want curious but not earnest. Someone says edgy but not too edgy. But someone says normal but not boring. They have to have a sense of humor. Or that, let's see what else here. Oh, I don't want a narcissist. Okay, that makes sense. Basically, and so like some of this is reasonable. Some of it's like very like picky. And then basically she's saying, the author says, I told these women all reasonably attractive but not drop dead gorgeous, all interesting but not off the charts fascinating, that at a certain point they might get lonely going on all these dates looking for the perfect one instead of building a nice life with someone. One woman says, I'm lonely, but loneliness is better than boredom. And then she talks about she does a fundraising job that's boring at times but fulfilling too, but she won't leave it for her passion because it's reliable and it's too risky to do that. So then the author says, so you'll compromise in your choice of a job and not your choice of a partner. You're willing to spend 8 hours a day in a good enough career instead of leaving it for your true love, being an artist. And the woman, of course, thought about this for a minute. Well, that's different. I'm practical about my career, but to be practical about love, you can't be practical about a feeling that just seems so unromantic. A guy walks in, oh, he's too short, even though the woman's saying this is 5'2", so I don't know what that means. Then basically talking about just like certain guys that they see coming in, and the author is saying how she's surprised a lot of these women were dismissing the cute guy because he was shorter. And she's basically saying like, they didn't even consider if they could learn more about him and maybe he'd have something to say if they talked to him. And this wasn't college where they had the same opportunities they did now. This was adult world. People are getting married. The pool of men is getting smaller and smaller. There isn't, it's not as, there aren't as many people available as when they were younger. And then she says she remembers back in her own experience in her early 20s where the possibilities seemed endless. All right. Thoughts and comments?
Yeah, a lot in there. Just this in general, like it's even from the beginning, I'm wondering what were these women looking for? And we talked about the access of people having access to in vitro fertilization being like the 1% of the 1%. But now I think even now talking about people that even consider these things when you're looking into relationships, that's got to be less than 5% of the world's population. In my estimation, it can't really be more than that. And then next, we believe in the science here. Yeah. We believe that we're a sexually dimorphic species. Yeah. What's good for the goose is not good for the gander. Otherwise, we'd all be geese. Yeah. I know even when somebody's saying I'm transitioning, or they say I identify with a certain, there's certain definitions of those different genders that they identify with, and people don't. Yes, there's some people claim there's hundreds of them and things like that, and they're developing these things, but they develop that, and just like a character creation in a role-playing game, they still try to flesh that out with certain demands and wants and desires that these people want vis-a-vis the rest of the population. Yep. We understand that there's certain things that males, masculine, feminine, men, women, males, females, in general, had a preference for. Generalizations work. When you're talking about general situations, generalizations work. And I'm saying all that to just say, like, some of the things you talked about here, there's been a transition where they seem to be desiring certain things that were traditionally things that men desired out of women, because in some senses, they've taken on the roles, they've taken on the certain things that they used to find desirable in men. Because first of all, boring, inspired, sense of humor. Those are common things. I want to be inspired. Or somebody bores me. First of all, in those kind of situations, like, it's not my job to entertain you. I am very self-entertaining. Why aren't people self-entertaining? Inspired. You should have your own inspiration. You should have your own things. Let somebody come on that journey with you. Sense of humor. There's many other things to laugh about. Why does it have to be the primary person that you're with? Yes, you want to spend time, but then why don't you just find a thing where that person might not have the sense of humor, but you at least share. You at least find similar things funny. So you can go to a Chappelle show. You can go listen to Nanette if you find that funny. But the person themselves doesn't have to have that sense of humor. But those are things that traditionally people say, oh, why did men consider women to have to entertain them? And they're just supposed to be the entertainers in the house and things like that. Why are they supposed to be driven by emotion and things like this? Why are they the ones who are supposed to be cheery and keep you upbeat? Why can't men do that? Now they're like demanding the men do that. And then the features that she was saying in herself, she said practical. She has a reliable job. She likes to focus on certain things. I have to focus on these things, and those were things that were normally used to be appealing of men. Yes, that man is very practical. He looks at things. He's not a spendthrift. He's living within his means. He's reliable. He shows up to a job. He keeps a job. He keeps the things. So I know he'll be reliable to me, and he's focused. So that focus that he has on these other aspects in his life, he will have that focus on me and the children. That used to be something that they have, but then the women have taken that upon themselves, and then now they seem to desire things from men that some of them, with some of the more feminist type of ideation, used to say that was negative for men to desire that from women. But now the women seem to desire that from men, and they don't really seem to see the incongruity or why it's not going to work out, because they were already told desiring these things is negative. So how come they also desire these things? And that's a weird thing that I've seen. I don't know if
well, something I was going to elaborate on, and they'll get into this as it goes on too, about like, I think the problem is these women, and I think other women, maybe some men too, is they're looking for a partner who's the complete package. Like, oh, this person has all my interests, and I can talk to them about all this stuff that I like and everything. And that's not realistic. Like when I was staying with my friend Abraham and his parents, we were talking about this, how his parents have different tastes in shows. Okay, so his dad talks to his friends about the shows he likes. The mother talks to it's like things like that. Like, yeah, I even look at my relationships with friends. Like anyone who knows me knows I have no interest in sports. Several of my friends, including you, do. So you talk to other people about sports. You talk to me about other stuff. You don't just talk to one person who satisfies all your interests. You're never going to find that. And again, we can understand this among friends, but like, why doesn't that apply to relationships too? Like, you're not going to find a man or a woman who has everything in common with you and you can talk to them. It's like, that's why you make friends. And they bring up, again, a few examples of this, like, oh, my spouse doesn't like to go to dinner parties. Okay, have an event with some of your friends or something, and then they can do something else. Or, oh, my spouse doesn't like sports, like my example. Okay, you have friends you talk to about that. You just have to find other ways to satisfy that. Like, it's like, don't keep looking for this one person who has it all. It's like, it just doesn't exist.
Yeah, and with that, like, because people have friends, and especially now in a common era, you can have way more friends than you did in the past. So I wonder why do people feel they need to get all those sources from one person? And then in addition, there's that term, friends with privileges. That is kind of an odd thing. Why, like, why are those privileges? Should those privileges be friends before any privileges? But you have situations where people are like, oh, you're my friend, so I'm not going to get closer to you physically or have these other romantic things with you. People seem to think that should be from strangers. And maybe that's a carryover from just having situations where people you married, you didn't actually get to know them before. It's the same thing when people talk like, oh, I want a princess marriage and things like this. You talk about this grand wedding and things like that. And I'm like, why are you so into this grand wedding? Do you know that princesses used to be like, you're a 35-year-old princess, your third daughter of this dynasty, and this man has this other duchy or kingdom somewhere else as like a 4-year-old, like some 70-year-old like male that is unmarried. So we're gonna marry you off together. Go live with this person now. You've never met. That's what princess marriages were. Those things were completely political kind of organizations. Yet people want to think they want to have that kind of thing. People. I don't know. It just seems like most people don't really have the discussion of what they want out of relationships, let alone marriages, before they actually get into relationships and then decide to actually get married. I don't know.
All right. So moving on. So the difference a decade makes. A few nights later, 5 single women in their late 30s to early 40s met at the same bar where I asked the same question. Why is it so hard to find a good guy? This one woman who's 39 years old said, check back with them in 10 years. She's 39 years old. If they're holding out for Prince Charming, they'll be bored and lonely. The job won't seem as exciting anymore. Drinks with the girls will get old. And on holidays, they'll be hanging out with their married friends and their kids or the nieces and nephews, which will only make them depressed that they don't have a family themselves. I admitted that I related to those younger women who wanted to be in a relationship but had a very specific idea of what that guy would be like. And as I got older, I explained my dating life slowly became this lethal paradox, desperate but picky. They knew exactly what I meant. This one 37-year-old woman says, I want to shake younger women, say, the guy who laughs too loud in public may not love the way you chew raw carrots at dinner parties, but that's not a deal breaker for me. Yeah. These women could easily list their former deal breakers, the reasons they didn't pursue relationships when they were younger. Here's what they said. He was very loving, but he wasn't romantic enough. On Valentine's Day, he made a mixtape of my favorite music and gave me an hour-long massage, but all day at work, whenever I saw the flower guy going up the hall delivering flowers to my colleagues, I kept thinking, where are my flowers? I wanted a guy who sent me flowers. Next one. He brought me flowers, but cheesy ones that just spoke to bad taste, and I sensed that I wasn't worth something more thoughtful. Next. He wasn't exciting enough. I felt like we were already married, which was nice in a way, but this was supposed to be the courting period. He had long nose hairs and they grossed me out, so I didn't have the courage to ask him to trim them, so I stopped seeing them. He cried. The first time I wasn't thrilled, but okay. Second time I bailed, I felt he was too weak for me. He was too predictable. Then I started dating guys who kept me on edge. I never knew what to expect. It was terrible. Now I'd give anything for predictable. I was embarrassed by his voice. Sometimes when he'd answer the phone at my place, people would think he was me because I have a low kind of voice, but otherwise he was a great guy, very masculine. Yeah. He was too optimistic. He was so cheery all the time, even early in the morning when the alarm went off, and I found that grating. He always found a silver lining. The stove broke, let's go out to dinner. But then I'd be upset that I had to buy a new stove. I didn't want to look on the bright side all the time. Then I dated a guy who was more cynical, and after a while it depressed me. So I tried to get the optimistic guy back, but he told me I was too pessimistic. There you go. He was completely bald except for one of those rings of hair around his head and a little tuft poking out in the front. It was such a turnoff. But I tried to get over it because I really, really liked him. My friend said he has a nice face. He's a nice body. Besides, most guys lose their hair eventually. But he was 35. I always have been attracted to guys who have the kind of hair you could run your fingers through. Now I'm lucky if the guys meet have any hair at all. He thought it was funny to make up strange words like fabulosa. He did this a lot and in public too. Once he said this to someone at a party, being a doctor isn't just one fabulosa after another, and I was embarrassed. I broke up with him the next day. He loved me too much. I felt like he was too much of a puppy dog, always looking at me with those adoring eyes. I wanted more of a manly man. He wasn't refined enough. He couldn't order off a wine list. He had never seen Casablanca. I wonder how you can be 32 years old and not have seen that. I just wasn't feeling it. Now I think, was I supposed to be feeling? Because actually I liked being with him more than any of the guys I felt strong chemistry with here before. All right. So thoughts on those deal breakers before we continue?
Show him Casablanca. If he hasn't seen it, like, just show it to him. Yeah. Like, okay, with some of these, again, talking about generalizations, anybody who says not all can go die in a fire. Like, if this isn't you, we're talking about specific things to flesh it out. But one thing I'm wondering here, could we also personally, this person, be focusing on a minority, because still majority of Americans are married. Part of the reason this is an issue for these women that we're talking about and the men that are also in a similar boat is an issue is because most people are coupled up before they get to these ages. Most people, the average age of marriage, I think it's still 25, it's 26, right? So
27 for women, I think.
Yeah. Okay, it's moved up to 27. So men would probably be around 30. Is that what they're trying to say? Is this happening?
I'd have to look it up for men. Yeah.
Now, I think you will definitely see a massive divide going this between like urban and rural areas. Most of the friends that I went to high school with who are living in the city, like, most of the people who are getting married around this age now are people that I lived with back in Washington, D.C. areas. So that was more like an urban area. The friends I know who lived when I went to school in West Virginia, that was more rural areas, they got married distinctly like a decade earlier was the marriages for those people. Now that could just be a lower set of different variables and things like that to feel establishment. What are the expectations? Who are the people that we're looking for? Because who really breaks up based off of things like fabulosa and the thing that, I mean, I know some people are rather shallow, but there's other things going in there between. I know she said that's like the probably the straw that breaks the camel's back, the main kind of turning point. But can it really be just that? I mean, I'm not saying some people aren't shallow enough to have just that, but this is kind of estimation. Like, how set do you have to think you are for the other things in your life that's how selective you are? That's how specific you are with your.
What I wonder with some of these is like were there other hangups that they didn't want to be vocal about, yes. So it's like they're picking some absurd thing and be like, well, he says this and it annoys me, and it's like, but there's something else that they either don't want to be vocal about or.
One of the basic things I'd like to check, because this happens, I think, when you actually go into the actual testing. There's very good biological reasons for this. You just look at the height. One of them mentioned height. That one is 100%. It's like 92% of people who are married to people who are taller. 92% of women are married to people taller than that. And now that also comes because of sexually dimorphic in general, the average height for women is lower. So that's kind of a thing that you're going to expect, even if you just keep on the sliding scale. Like everyone is 5'2" can find a woman who's 5'2" can find a man who's 5'3". That kind of thing. That kind of slides. But another one that people don't want to mention as much, I want to know how much all these men were earning. If these men were earning less than these women and they're not mentioning that, that's a big thing that it might not be comfortable for certain people to mention that that's a thing that they count for, but you actually look at the actual statistics, and most women marry men who earn more than they do. And when the men start earning less, they normally leave this man. This is a practical thing that's actually there with the figures and things like that. So,
well, and I was going to elaborate. The height thing kind of annoys me a little bit. I mean, I guess I have some bias here because I'm 5'9", so I'm not very tall. But the thing is, there's a biological explanation why women want taller guys, security and all that. I can't be mad about that. But the problem is how many are hung up on getting a guy that's 6 foot and above. And what is it, like 13% of men are 6 feet and above? I think it's like 3% of men are 6'2" and above, and then like less than 1% is 6'5" and above. So, and that's just height among the entire male population. So I always emphasize like that's, gay men, married men, men in prison, men in insane asylums, like whoever. It's not like all young, good-looking, rich men who are that tall. So it's like if you're hung up on that kind of height, and then you're going to hold out till you find a guy who meets exactly like that, well, your chance, what are the odds? And I mean, there's even that app now, the female delusion calculator. I mean, snarky title, obviously, but where you can enter all that in, and it uses U.S. Census data, and they've shown like women will say like, oh, I want a guy who's 6'5" and makes $500,000 a year, and is my preferred ethnicity, and you run it in, it's like 0.0001% of the so it's like, and then ultimately, as we'll get into as this goes on, do those things even make for a successful marriage, or is it cool and exciting and like, at first, but like, will it actually last? Like, will it keep a marriage together long term? I'd argue no, and I think many of these marriage experts would say the same.
Yeah, that's the thing. I would like to know about the cost. I would also like to know if any of these women were planning on having kids soon, and had they discussed that with their with these people that they left. I think in many of these cases you'll find that kids were not brought up, or both of them had said, oh, we have no plans of having kids anytime soon. Whereas in my estimation, the marriages where people are like, oh, we're trying to have kids as soon as possible, those seem to hold together, because that's, as I mentioned, the primary purpose for the institution of marriage as we've known it. But yeah, from your estimation, I think even now we're getting older. We have fewer and fewer female friends and male friends who are single and things like that. And yeah, that's the thing. We might be focusing on a small group of people. Just how in social politics we say, okay, we're focusing on New York, DC, LA, Chicago, these big places, and ignoring the flyover states. I wonder how much this kind of content would truly apply to people in the real America, or just the rural America, the average kind of person that doesn't live in these relatively new constructions that these mega cities, these mega communities are. I think that could be something to think of, because it's not a big issue here in Kenya. In
fairness, I've thought about this a little bit recently, because I've talked about women having standards like this to some of my female friends who either have boyfriends or are married, and they laugh at these women. They're like, my husband or boyfriend's not perfect. Like, why are you hung up on? And like, I actually had one friend, my friend said to me, she's like, I've typically dated men that I think I'm better looking than. I'm like, well, is there any reason for that? She's like, I go for intellect over looks. A lot of the really good looking guys are either jocks or meatheads, so I can't really like talk to them about much of anything. Also, if they're really good looking, a lot of women are trying to get with them, so there's loyalty issues. And she admits she has her own self-esteem issues too. But the thing is, she's been with her guy a number of years and they're happy together, so what she's doing is working, obviously. Whereas some of these other women, it's like, oh, I have to have all these things, and it's, hey, how come I can't meet a good guy? And the author will get into this in her own experience too. Well, if your standards are so precise, they don't reflect the majority of guys. Yeah, if your standard is what a good guy is, the majority of men are by definition are not good men. It's just, it doesn't exist,
And it does not necessarily mean, because it doesn't, and this isn't like you're not inherently like a horrible person. This depends on when you are in life. Like if you met Silas at 15, he's not the same person as Silas today. We're interested in different kind of things. When you're younger, both men and women, unfortunately, they add a situation where men have just this wide open access to pornography and to a small cadre of relatively low standards for access, sex from certain females and things like that. Then you have other women who are told focus on these other things, and then they have like the state, which in my estimation, just all the state programs does an equivalent thing to female signaling for for relationships as pornography and things like that does to male, where it's like, oh, you're appealing just to open access to sex and things like this, and the females have open access to resources as long as you, with a low barrier for entry of you to actually needing to bring anything else to achieve or maintain and have access to those resources. You can just get them, and the state will just redistribute resources to you. And the men can also just find all these easy women, because the women don't have to raise their standards and say, for you to actually get access to this, you need to actually show me you're reliable, because they can rely on somebody else to provide it. So that whole situation, I understand that's mucked things up to a point where there's a lot of mixed signals. And yeah, what are people looking for? Because at younger, if you're a woman and you're riding the cock carousel, as they say, and then you get to a point, a lot of women get older and they say, okay, now I want to have kids. And then you're trying to look for men who are focused on having kids. Whereas before, you were not necessarily focused on men who wanted to have kids, because men who wanted to have kids are not just going to sleep around as much as you were sleeping around. They're looking for something else in a different sense. So when you get older and you start saying, I'm looking for men who want to have kids, you've already changed. You're a different person now. Your mentality has changed. You transitioned into a different status of your existence. But most of the men who were in that mindset have already achieved and already gotten the few women who at that younger age, or the less than women at that younger age, that were in that similar mindset. So that's something that happens. Then a lot of men who don't really achieve that, get that person when they're younger, they get to an older age and they also get jaded and they fall out to that. And it's unfortunate. I see more with the men. There's a lot of nihilism when they get older towards kids. They just have this devaluation of children. Children are awesome. Like my sister has kids and my friends have kids, and they're awesome beings. But I see a lot of men in the manosphere and things like that who just like seem to just throw away the idea of having kids. And then that's a similar thing that I think with women when they're younger, and that's why you see, I think, with a different kind of relationship towards like, oh, pro-choice or having abortions and things like that, where they're not that selective on ways to prevent actually a pregnancy beginning, where there's many ways to do that, where they have less of an idea. Then they get older and then now they transition. So I think there's a bit of a switch over that happens there. That's an imbalance that's happening, and I think it can be addressed that plays in this. What's your estimation? Like, with you personally, what's your estimation on kids? Like, what's your idea of like, okay, how much has that been part of your calculus when you're getting into relationships with people?
I mean, I've been thinking about it more lately, probably because I'm 33 now. My dad married my mom when he was 34. So I think I'm getting to a point where I'm taking this more seriously. Whereas in the past, I was like, oh, maybe I'll have kids one day. I don't know. But now I'm thinking about it more actively. But to sort of add on to your point, I thought of two people that I know. I have a friend who basically kind of fools around. And he said like, oh, if I meet the right woman, I'd marry her. But I'm not meeting them. And then my issue with this is it's that whole thing of like, you can't turn a hoe into a housewife, but there's the other side of that too. If you're a guy who just sleeps around, the women who you're sleeping around with are not going to marry you. It's like, these are just women who themselves are sleeping around. And I think this friend, he has to get his priorities of, okay, if you want to be a playboy, fine, go out, sleep around, but you're probably not going to get a wife. If you want a wife, you have to find a woman who's serious about these things, as you're saying. And then I knew another woman, I think I mentioned her a bit to you in the past. She ran a dating show, and she was kind of a puzzle to me because it's like a podcast, I should say, not like a show, but like she talked about like, oh, I'm the
podcast.
but well, no, but I mean, like, she doesn't have like a show on TV or something. I was trying to be, but basically she's like, she's like, oh, I come from a very traditional family background and I want that for myself. But then she's like, oh, I'm the Samantha of my friend groups. Oh yeah, I'll sleep with a guy on the first date, all this. So it's just like, these things don't go together. It's like the example with my male friend. It's like, you sleep around randomly with, you're just going to attract guys who will sleep with you and move on. If you want a guy who's serious about a family, you have to be mature, serious. It's like, you can't have both of these things, because then she's going to be another one that'll be like some of these women, like 40 or above, and be like, hey, how come I can't get a good guy? It's like, well, if all you wanted to do was just sleep around, I mean, you're not going to attract a guy who will stick with you long term. I mean, this just doesn't go together.
Okay, so you were talking about like the different situations, people looking at things at different times in life, and I was thinking it would be interesting to see. We're talking about the lived experience that people have. We learn from what we witness, and another thing I think would be interesting to see is how much public education, specifically public education, kids have had according to how they fit with this whole situation with MGTOW, men going their own way, manosphere, those kind of people, and PUA, those people, and then also the inverse, the feminist, I don't need no man, I'm going to be a career woman, then I'll somehow have kids when I'm 45 and things like that. And I think you posted that recent thing where somebody said, okay, somebody else might have posted, but it was like, once once the public school had control over sex education, like people couldn't understand what gender they were in like 10 years. It was like a decade or something like that. So we've talked about the negative effect, the mutating effect that the state has on different things, but I think that can also be applied in education, in schooling, where so much of your actual being raised is being done by this state, by this other institution. So growing up, you divorce that from the relationship that your parents have, because it doesn't really matter. All these parents have different kind of relationships, different kind of house relationships, but for majority of the day, they all dump their kids off in one place. So when you're growing up, you think, once I get married, the idea of how often have these people actually seen their parents, like how involved were their parents in actual parenting? How many of them had stay-at-home moms or stay-at-home father? How many of those parents had time to actually spend time with those kids in the nurturing sense, outside of just like, oh, I'm dropping you off to this activity. Oh, I'm able to afford to send you to this location. That was, I think, what most people do. So a lot of people kind of focus on that aspect, and they don't really have that connection. I think that's why for a lot of them, they don't necessarily, because they see, if my parents really were married to have kids with us, then why were they giving us off to these other institutions instead of spending a lot of time raising us? So I think there could be some kind of divorce there. I don't know if that's it's something that anybody has actually studied. If anybody has seen a study with that, I think that would be an interesting thing to see. Because
I don't think it comes up in here at all, but that is an interesting assessment to sort of see how it would tie into this, because like you say, it's like they don't really have that framework for like what makes a good relationship. It's like, yeah, I see my parents are together and happy, but it's like, unless you ask them about it, you don't learn that stuff actively because you're not seeing it in action all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, and then also the environment that I think kids used to be in. Even if you're out in the village, like I was talking about, when my uncle was telling you that story, he was choosing to walk in the village to do something that was actually productive, and then saw the wife and was like, okay, the future wife, and was like, okay, that was in the regular day-to-day activities that they chose to do that was somehow productive. When they're putting it in the education environment, it's just like, you happen to be a certain arbitrary age, you happen to live in a certain location, we're going to put you in these classes for these arbitrary reasons that you have to just do these kind of things. And that's the main thing that selects the group of people that you're around. So they kind of get inculcated in this idea where it's just like, you have to be with this person for this other social reason outside of you actually choosing to be here. You don't like this class, but you have to be in this class. Then you make the best that you can do with the people in that class. Oh, this is your partner. You have to be partner. You assign this partner in your lab class. And I think that whole ideation kind of goes into the rest of the people they have relationships with. I don't really know why I'm here, but I chose to be here for some reason, and you happen to be here. So since we're here together, let's bump uglies. Like it's kind of that. And I think that carries over into the rest of adulthood, unfortunately. Yeah.
All right. So moving on. So she talks about her own the reasons that she had passed up certain guys when she was younger. Other stupid reasons. She talks about this guy had red hair. I don't know why. She talks about this guy overused the word awesome and that it irritated her. Let's see here. So then she talked about how I guess let's see here. This not bother, and then then she talks about like they didn't meet very specific superficial criteria, and I don't want to. She had the attitude of I didn't want to wait this long searching for the one, only to end up settling. And then she talks about like how would it have been if would I really have settled if I had dated for these guys? I'll never know. And then she talks about like these women she'd met. At the bar, she was embarrassed by the way she dismissed men previously. These guys didn't fit some picture perfect image of what they thought they'd end up with, but ultimately going down this path led to them ending up with nobody. And she talks about what would her deal breakers be, when she's writing. She's like, well, it'd be someone with an addiction, someone with a bad temper, someone who's mean, someone who's unemployed, someone who's inflexible, someone who's irresponsible, et cetera, et cetera. And she's basically saying like, the rest of the stuff is negotiable because it's like, you may date or marry someone with weird habits or something. But I mean, if it's not like really ruining the relationship or your life, I mean, who cares? So then in a way, I'm still looking for the same kind of guys when I was 25, except now I want them to be family oriented and good providers, which I wasn't thinking about back then. This is a 37-year-old pharmaceutical rep. Those are the guys I used to break up with. A 43-year-old interior designer said she always had boyfriends until she was 39, when then suddenly she stopped getting asked out by anyone younger than 50. So, why can't they go back to those guys they passed up who now seem pretty appealing? And the women all said at the same time, it's because they're all married. All right. Thoughts and comments before I continue?
Yeah, that some people say it's the wall. They call it the wall and things like that. That is, it's a rather sudden thing. It's real. And it's when we say the wall is undefeated. Yes, some people talk about it in the sense of, it's falsely think it's equating just the looks, because she probably did not look much different from 39 to 40. Like, it's not like her all of a sudden there's like a huge breakout of wrinkles and things like that. Everything dropped. No. That didn't happen. But there is a certain calculation. Just in the same way, ask a general woman. When you get to the point where someone's like 5 figures, this is 6 figures, 7 figures. Think about the change of mentality to somebody, 6 figures to 7 figures. That person who's making that right at the end, $1 under 6, 7 figures. Once you hear the 7, the general attractiveness of that person like skyrockets. It's not like a slow kind of. It's like, no, 5 figures is here, 6 figures all of a sudden is a big jump in the plateau. Then it hits 7 figures and it's like off the scale. That's the kind of thing that happens is, and there's a general calculation that people have the mentality. When you see 39 is different than 40. That's why when people sell things in stores, it's like 99.99. There's an aspect in those kind of things. There's a reason some of these dates. There's a reason it's been a traditional thing to say you don't ask a woman her age. People understand these things. And I think you look at other cultures, and oddly enough, other cultures seem to be more realistic about these actual realities of human nature. In a country with America that's supposed to tote this women's empowerment, supposed to tote this freedom of speech, there's still certain things that seem to be taboo, at least within certain groups of people, to bring up and mention and discuss. And like, why don't we just be honest about that? But there is a concerted difference. And then, as we mentioned, this is a conversation about marriage, the practicalities of that. If you marry somebody, if you don't want to have kids immediately, you're thinking, okay, you get to know somebody, you get to know them comfortable enough, you move in together, which is a general typical thing with some Americans. Then you get married, then you have some time to establish yourself as a married couple. If you're doing this at 40, that's 2 to 3, 4 years. By the time you're actually attempting your first kid, you're around 44, 45. That's a challenge, not just, even if you physically, biologically able to do it and have a healthy kid, you're also just in general older. This is a concern that I have. I'm getting older and I'm thinking like, oh man, have a kid now, like by the time the kid's in their teens, like you're in like your, like, how old are you going to be by the time you have grandkids? If you just have like a realistic type of thing, you're like already like 80, 90, those kind of ages. It's like just the energy levels that you would have to actually spend and have a quality of life with these people. You also, in addition that you mentioned, the groups, if you're in a situation where you're taking your kids to different events, you have younger kids. Most people are getting married at 27. You're getting married in your 40s and your 50s. What kind of things are you going to be relating with those kids? Maybe it's like going to be like your friends got married earlier, and then you're going to be hanging out with their grandkids. Your kids are going to be hanging out with their grandkids instead of like yeah. So it's kind of I don't know. It's a tough thing. There's many calculations, and the age is a very real thing. And I'm thinking this is part of why I should wrote this book. This is something that you're doing a disservice to your children if you don't tell them before. You're doing a disservice to your friends if you don't tell them before. At least for now, I'm not married yet, but I'm definitely encouraging all my friends who are married to have as many kids as possible. So if I ever get lucky enough to get married, my kids will have like older cousins and things like that to hang out with ahead of time. But it's something that I think is a disservice. If you really value somebody, do your best to get that person to find somebody else that values them and create more copies of those people in the world. And I think the world will be better for it. But yeah,
I sort of get blowback for this, but I say it anyway. But I noticed, especially in the modern culture, what we were talking about men's standards versus women's standards, where I've noticed even if I talk to my boomer parents, if I talk about certain women I know having high standards, they get defensive and it's just, oh, well, this is what they want, all this. And I always get enraged when I hear this because I'm like, you can want whatever you want, but wanting something, number one, doesn't entitle you to it, and two, it's like, does that thing exist, and does that thing want you? Like the guy on the roommate said, you can want to go to a top college, but if you have a 2.5 GPA, no extracurricular activities, low test scores, you can want to get into these schools all you want. They're not going to accept you out of sympathy. It's the same thing here. Like, yeah, you can want the perfect guy, but what kind of woman are you, and what do you bring to the table relative to other women who want that guy, even if he exists? So it's like I feel like a lot of people just aren't honest with themselves about these calculations. And it's like, again, it gets into the double standards, men versus women. But also, I mean, a good example of this is like the body positivity thing. There's no body positivity movement for men, but you have 350-pound women on Cosmopolitan, and we're told this is beautiful, don't fat shame. So there's stuff like that too. I guess some feminists would say this is a correction to, in the past, maybe men, like Abraham's mother talked about when she was younger, women were taught about what men wanted. I don't subscribe to that. I mean, if I'm trying to be charitable to them, that's what they would say. But it's just like, I just keep seeing these women with high standards and people defending it. And then when the men are like, oh, I just want a nice, kind woman who doesn't fight and is moderately attractive, all this. And like, I hear, oh, what, you want to go back to the 50s? You just want like, mindless housewife who blindly follows you. And it's like, yeah, there's a big disconnect on both, on this for a few reasons. Yeah.
And even if women were being told what men want, there's always been a general thing where men are whole man up. That whole man up thing has been a common thing. So it's like men had to be this. This is what you had to achieve. You had to be this. And then once you're that, then you can demand this from the women. It wasn't just like any man can be that. It wasn't just like any schlub was out there. No, you're supposed to be out there earning your money. So the men still had things that we're doing. If you do these things, then you will be able to actually get the access to the more valuable in this kind of subject society, females who have the control over reproduction. That is a biological thing. Any society that does not primarily focus on the well-being of the primary controllers of reproduction will end. So most societies in their various ways have that. So yeah, that's one thing that I see. And I remember one of the courses I took when I was finishing my undergrad in Rome was women in philosophy. And this is something that we're being taught. I was still more towards, I guess, more of the typical kind of new wave type of feminism type of ideas. I never really bought into it as much because, first of all, most of my friends were female, and they would tell me things about the way they thought. And like, this is BS. The stuff they're telling me is completely BS. Some of these women are grimy or just like vicious. Anyway, I didn't have that idea of just pedestaling them. But I was still at the same point, like, these are amazing people, so varied in people. And I'd see the weaknesses that when men have their own relationships, they see that it's not this character of them. I saw a lot of similarities in that sense. But regardless, got to college, and then I was learning about the Victorian times of these kind of ideations. It's kind of the time back then, the way families were ran, and so the men would be out there working, and they would not normally really be that involved in the shaping of the child's personality until the child was like 13, around that age. The coming of age, and the boys would start learning what the man was doing, and then the girls would start spending time, at least in the tutorship or under the man, to get to know what a male should do. Those kind of things right there. So all that time they're talking about the sexist, back in the day, the sexist Victorian times. And then I just asked the teacher, I was like, look, okay, so you're saying that first of all, it was governesses, it was the mothers, it was the maids, it was like the female teachers, still predominantly in the United States of America, 95% or so is women teaching the kids. So if you're saying that there was a situation where society was sexist towards women, or women were taught to be subservient, you tell me that women were the ones who were teaching the boys to be sexist towards the girls, and they were teaching the girls to be subservient? Or was it just certain roles that they actually hold? And I know there's that aspect of learned behavior where somebody abuses you and then you grow up to be the abuser, so you can carry on that abuse. But is that what they were trying to say? And maybe some feminists do make that claim, that there's been a massive type of drive. But then now they want to invert that by doing an inverse, by saying all girls are good in schools and things like that, doing all these female positions, and then they have certain negative outcomes coming out with men. Like, oh, that has nothing to do with this switch around in messaging. And these are the things that I just don't really understand. It's something that I've noticed.
Yeah. All right. All right, so now going on, I had to wonder who were the women that married these guys. So she met some of them. On the surface, they looked like a lot of the women who had dumped their husbands, like the women she had met in the bars, around the same age and similar in terms of looks and education. In fact, I'd imagine these married women have become their single counterparts. If it hadn't been for the one distinguishing quality, the ability to redefine romance. Nancy, who was married to the quote unquote to the predictable guy that she turned down, said, "I think the difference between women who get married and women who don't is that the women who don't get married never give up the idea that they're going to marry Brad Pitt, and it never occurs to them that they might not get married at all. They may say, I'm never going to meet anyone, but that's like saying, oh, I'm fat when you just don't believe you are. It's something women just say in a self-deprecating way. When you're young, you're always meeting guys, so deep down you believe that the one will suddenly show up. It doesn't occur to you that maybe it's okay if the one doesn't look like Brad Pitt and earn $1 gazillion and make your knees go weak every time you're together. Well, it occurred to me, but not till I was age 35. And that's when she met Mr. Predictable, who the author turned down. So many women say they'd rather be alone than settle, but then they're alone and miserable and still holding out for the same unrealistic standards. Nancy said they assume their soulmate will appear, will have been worth the wait, but then they're blindsided and shocked when that doesn't happen, and it's too late. Too late, she meant for the life she has with the predictable guy. It is, she goes, it is predictable, but it's a lot better than always wondering what's going on with the more exciting guys. That wasn't love. What I have now is love. I have an amazing husband and 2 wonderful kids. I couldn't ask for a better family. And my husband is exciting, just in less obvious ways. So then there's another woman, Sarah, who's 42, who married the ring of hair guy with the funny hair she talked about. Told her that she feels lucky to have been at a place at 34 where she finally stopped getting hung up on things like how much hair a guy had. A year or 2 earlier, I wouldn't have even considered meeting a bald guy. She's glad she changed her mind, because if she hadn't, she would have missed out on falling in love with her husband and probably ended up alone. I don't know one available guy out there who's as desirable as my husband and would also date me at this age. If I were single today, my own husband probably wouldn't date me either. I wouldn't be on his radar. Why would a 43-year-old guy who's kind of successful date a 42-year-old woman when he could easily attract an equally interesting 35-year-old who's prettier and young enough to have kids with instead? I mean, 35 is not young in terms of marriage, but I guess comparatively. I told Sarah a lot of women would be offended by that thinking, but she shrugged anyway. Let me put it this way. It's a good thing that I met my husband when I did, because if I had passed him by, he'd be married and I'd still be sitting around wondering where the few good men are. Okay. Thoughts and comments?
Yeah, it just goes back into something we discussed before. It's why we're really interested in economics. Everything is economics. There's this term that's becoming more popular, the sexual marketplace value. And this is just something just to be realistic about yourself. You just understand that you can demand a certain thing, but what's the cost of that? Because it's a trade-off. If you have standards, if you, for example, say, I have 5 things that are 100%, these are standards that I must be met. Even if you don't match the same things as somebody else, at least understand that somebody who's coming to that relationship with you can say, I'm going to have at least 5 of their own. If yours is weight and theirs is something else, theirs might be height, that might be the kind of situation. Like if you have a height thing where you say height is a must, then a man coming in saying weight is a must, that's something you can accept. You should be able to understand. But I think many situations, this happens with both men and women, they have certain expectations, but they're like, don't hold me to these standards, but I should be able to demand these 10 things. But you're only allowed to demand 3 things. Like if you go to these other things, this whole area of things or demands is completely ridiculous. Like you're not allowed to demand those things. But I'm allowed to demand similar things out of you. And that's an absurd state of affairs. That's something you just need to be aware of. Like I'm not sitting here like an incel. I'm not sitting here like angry. Like I understand why I'm not necessarily attracting certain kinds of women, because I haven't achieved a certain point in my life where I think I would be at a point to kind of attract the sort of women I think I would want to have a family with. That's something that I am completely honest with. I'm aware of, and I'm thinking before getting these kind of steps, I understand certain kind of things that would be appealing this time. So that's something that I don't think many people understand or know. They might think, what do I want? That simple question, as you said, that a lot of people are asking, a lot of these people in the dating gurus in this space, they say, okay, what does my partner want? Doesn't have to be what the men want. If you're a man, what do women want? If you're a woman, what do women want? If you're a woman and you want women, what do women want? And those other women in general might have certain things. Then when it comes down to what does my partner, what is a sort of person that you think is attractive? What do you think that sort of person would want from a partner? And I think many people would not necessarily be able to answer that. At least many of the single people, many of the people who are with someone, they answer that question because they had that thing and they found somebody who was actually somebody who fit the parameters of what they have. And how many other things in people's lives do you have in your life because it matched every single thing that you wanted? And I think this is part of the American dream, it's part of the American lie and the American reality. Reality is better than dreams. The American dream can be everything that you want. You can achieve everything. You can do everything. Everything should be exactly like yours. Have it your way. That's not realistic to actual life. Very few things in your life matched. Let's say you have 10 things, 10 requirements in every single thing. How many things in your life have matched all 10 of these requirements? Most of the things probably haven't. Most of the things, it's even good if they've met half the requirements that you have, but you're still very happy and content with those things. And I think that's something that you can actually see with this.
Well, something, and this theme will probably be recurring as the conversation goes on, but you talk about economics, and I think of what Thomas Sowell taught me years ago about there really aren't solutions, there's trade-offs, and you just have to weigh which is the best trade-off that's possible. Because, like, I was talking to my friend Abraham about some of these Instagram models. Like, there's one Demi Rose that I think is really hot. I don't know if you know, she's a British lady, and like, we talked about, like, what would it be like dating a woman like that? Well, probably, okay, yeah, she's beautiful, but very high maintenance. Probably you have to spend a certain amount of money. Other guys are going to be trying to get with her constantly. And then how loyal would she be? And then it's like, would she be fun to be around? It's like all that would come with other consequences. Then it's like, if you get a less attractive woman, you know, she may not get that same attention. You know, she may not be as exciting in terms of looks, but, you know, other guys aren't going to be trying to get with her. She's probably going to have other strengths. So it's like, you have to weigh the trade-offs. But the problem is some of these women, and I guess some men who hold out, they want someone who has all of those things. Like, I've said to a few people, like, I could imagine what my ideal woman would look like look like this model, like have this one's wine knowledge, this female friend's sense of humor, have this female friend's taste in food. But you have to, realistically, that doesn't make any sense. I have to accept that, okay, I'll probably get a few of these things, and there will be other things that I have issues with, and I just have to weigh, okay, does the good outweigh the bad? And that's the best I can hope for. Not, okay, there's someone who meets 100% of this criteria.
Yeah, that's one thing that we see with these Instagram models. Instagram models go together with like with athletes in many cases. There's a few, of course. Again, now we're talking about with the minority, because the majority of athletes are married, have kids, and you don't really hear much about them. But the ones you hear about, invariably, it's like, oh, they had some socialite or something like that. And there's this one, I don't know if you know who Brittany Jenner is. She's apparently just like bankrupted like a few, like just random was like just like she's known for bankrupting like different NBA players.
Oh wow!
It's crazy.
I've heard about
these kind of people.
I've heard about her. I didn't know the name, but yeah, I've heard the story.
Yeah, it was like something like $250,000. Some of these people, the amounts of money that they're being paid a month or a week, or some of these celebrities and things like that, and it's weird. And I guess some of this has transitioned. Like I know we compare the achievements of athletes and stuff like that. That's the equivalent of somebody who's like, Instagram is the equivalent of being a professional athlete. Yeah. Because men in general were judged off of their physical capabilities, but it's in the sense of sports, it's more of a game. It's not necessarily somebody doing something practical out there, like building like a massive, like building like a Sistine Chapel type of thing, or building something like computers and things like that. I guess we can talk about a different sense, but that's like more of just the physical attractiveness of the physical, basic human biological expression of a male is in sports, in those kind of sports. And then the women, Instagram is kind of things where it's just the physical form of the female, the attractiveness, that's also there. So I think those two kind of match up in a sense. Yeah. But one aspect about it that's odd, people talk to athletes and things like that about socio-political things and think they have something to say about it, but they hardly put Instagram people at the same kind of point when they kind of fit the same niche. I'm like, it's like you don't go to like Demi Moore's Robbie's like profile to wonder what she's saying about social politics. But if you actually hear her talk about social politics, it's a lot like what NBA players are saying, what football players are saying, and you can see the kind of connection.
I always laugh because her stories are usually all this like mystical stuff, like today's moon affirmation is such and such. Say this, and your angels will be in alignment. You're one with the universe, and I'm like, what would I even talk to this woman about? Like, it's just like, it would just be, it's like, and then I'm I don't know. But okay, so moving on here, a few more pages in this chapter, and I think we'll wrap. This is chapter 1. We can wrap it up after this because we're getting. All right.
How many chapters are there? We don't really think of doing this like, oh, just in the short part that we're talking for like hours, but yeah.
Yeah. I have to see how many chapters there are here. They're different lengths. Some of the stuff I'm going to summarize a little more. Let me see here. 27 chapters.
And the book is 300 and some pages, so y'all can get pick it up for yourself. And as we mentioned with these, I think normally the first part's normally a lot. Of course, we're introducing the content, and some of the stuff will get repetitive. And I'm assuming she talks about more specific issues that we might have talked about already in the analyzations. Okay.
Yeah, and some of this stuff, like I said, like when she gets into like specific details about dates and stuff, she goes, "I'm not going to read all that because it's not like that relevant." All right. So then, where were a few good men? So she sent out a mass email looking for single men. So then she talks about single include men who weren't married but were in committed relationships, and then they talked about why are women saying they can't find a good guy, and then there's talking about how the problem is that good guys are out there, but women don't recognize them. A woman broke up with me because she didn't like the clothes I wore. This is a 29-year-old professor talking, but she's madly in love with a guy who dresses her well but doesn't call her. His colleague, who's a 30, said women never want what's available. If they can't find the perfect guy at 30, they move on to something better, but they don't learn from this. Even if they're still alone 5 years later, they get pickier. Then they're almost 40 and they haven't found the perfect guy, so they start to regret having broken up with us. But now we're not interested in them anymore. Kurt, who's 38 engaged, said that's exactly what happened with his exes. Those perfect guys, if they do exist, want to date maybe the top 1% of 30-year-old women, but every 30-year-old woman I know thinks she's in that top 1%. All women want a 10, but are they all 10s? And that was my point about, like, yeah, you can want a perfect guy, but are you a perfect woman? Usually, no. The culture tells us to approach dating like shopping, but in shopping, no one points out the shopper's own flaws. That's an interesting analogy. Steve, who's 35 and dating a lawyer, feels the same way. I think the reason some women have an inflated view of themselves is that in high school, they really did have the power, so they grow up thinking it will always be that way. And even in their 20s, they still do to an extent because they're so in demand. A guy will spend all of his money courting her, investing in a relationship, and then one day she'll suddenly say, you're a great guy, but I'm not feeling like this is what I want. In their 30s, he continued, it's the opposite. The girl gives the guy free sex thinking she's investing in a relationship that will lead to marriage. But then the guy who is now in demand suddenly says, I think you're great, but you're not the one I want to marry. And the women are shocked because guys used to worship them, but the balance of power has changed. And I can't say I don't feel slightly vindicated that the same women who rejected me 5 years ago now complain they can't find anyone. All right. So that I've noticed some of this stuff too, especially my age, making more money than I used to and things. So I'm curious to what you think. Yeah.
Yeah. Now with this one, there have been some recent articles talking about like there's now a college gap. Now, not all degrees are the same. You can ask whether these people are graduating, but now they're talking about how it's like 60% in general, of like liberal arts, especially liberal arts, it's like 65% is female. And then when people graduating, men are stopping to go, and then they're saying, this is leading to a pandemic of single men, which are the biggest threat to society, the ideations that come from these. And we haven't really had a discussion of what is the ideation of. Now, as you mentioned, there's no involuntary celibate women really, I think, of any age. When we get like 70s, at that point, they don't really want to have sex anymore, I think, at that point. Yeah. But all that time, if you're like 60, 65, you could probably still go out there and find somebody to achieve that. But then what is the effect of the involuntary single, like insins? I think that would be insins. Now, the insins would be something that goes into the women. Now, I think we're going to start noticing that whole aspect of what is going to happen with those ideation when you have a general cohort of those women who are in that situation. Because if you have the incels, if you have these single men on the inverse, because we still live in the societies, most places listen to this, monogamous societies where you don't really have polygamy. And I think that's one of the things that you'll see. You'll start seeing a push for polygamy to come back. You'll start seeing a thing where it's like a woman's going to be like, okay, rather than lose my man to somebody else, I'm going to be a lot more comfortable with having some kind of approval on the other women that he decides to bring into this relationship with. And I'm not necessarily against that. People, if you can afford to have the kids, have as many kids as you want. I'm okay with that. If you have an agreement where it's like however many adults come together and they say we're going to actually raise the kids together and this is what we want to do, and I'm not feeling like I'm lying to this person. I'm stealing from somebody else, stealing time. If you feel you can afford the kids, you're not really relying on the state to pay for your decisions and things like that. Have as many wives and as many kids as you want. I think that would actually be positive things. In many cases, if you have societies that do that, some of the people who can achieve the most in that society will be able to pass their genes more and maybe raise their kids in an environment that could be positive. They could be definitely positive to that, but it's the cost. And that's what all this is, cost-benefit analyses, trade-offs. shopping, if you're approaching like shopping, something came up in the conversation we had with Steve recently, talking about how the customer is not always right. The customer is often very, very wrong. First of all, the customer needs to be able to afford what they're actually getting from the store. Second of all, the customer comes into the store, they might not really even understand what the store wants. They might think they're looking for X, Y, Z, but the person who's running the store is like, no, you actually should be getting ABC if you actually want to do X, Y, Z. So that's the kind of situation that's in there. So and this is the thing, it's a buyer's market. You have to be able to demand something. You have to be able to afford it. And do you even know what the hell it is that you want when you're actually going out there? And I think a lot of people don't. Yeah,
because the analogy I made is like, you can say I want any house I want, but unless you're a multi-billionaire, that makes no sense. Because it's like, everyone would pick the nicest penthouse or mansion or whatever that they wanted, but everyone can't afford that. And it's like, just feeling because you want it, you deserve it. It's like, well, what are you bringing? I mean, if you're like, they're not going to, Abraham's parents wouldn't sell their McMansion for $50,000 if they could get several million for it. It makes no sense.
And again, this is why I'm saying it's coming back to that ideation of America. You can be everything. You deserve everything. And where does this come from? This doesn't. There's not too many good parents who do this. This comes mostly from the schooling indoctrination complex, where they don't teach basic economics. They don't teach basic supply and demand. They don't teach realistic ability to actually choose and actually have a value system of this is what I actually achieve. Oh, we're going to have a situation where we're going to curve the grades. Hey, some kids doing bad. We're going to raise the bottom. We're going to change this. Oh, like the teacher doesn't really teach well. You're not allowed to actually grade the teacher. Like, no, the teacher is the person you have to stay with. You can't actually say the teacher is bad. Like, no, this is just a system. And so people have that same ideation into life where. Because I was trying to think, what other things are people so insistent it has to be to my perfection on? But the people of this ideation, it carries on to other kinds of things. And I'm thinking of things in the past that I was like, something has to be, the story has to be perfect before I actually tell somebody the story. Or this drawing has to be a certain way. Or, my life has to be in a certain way before I try to improve this other part of my life. And that's something that has held me back. And I think it's good to see that whether or not this is late, because as we mentioned in this first chapter, as I'm sure you've seen in the Manosphere and those kind of places, these are things that people have been talking about for at least I can even go back I guess the internet hasn't really been out since 2007 when this first came to me, but some of the people who started these earlier shows in the Manosphere and things like that, they were quoting things like Briefold's Law and things like that where people were writing about in the 80s, in the 90s, as they were starting to see some of these things happen. So I'm glad to see that now, better late than never, which is not been that late. It's still happening within technically a generation or two. You're not going to have that much lost of a generation as people recalibrate their actual calculus of what a relationship is in an environment where you have so much choice and diversity in order to actually achieve the same thing that eventually I think we mostly want, is to find somebody to have kids. Men are frustrated because they can't attract somebody when they're younger. Women are getting frustrated because they can't attract men when they're older. And in many cases, the same men that have been frustrated by the women 20 years ago, 20, 30, 20, 10 years ago, those women now are the ones who are frustrated. And I think once those two groups kind of share their information together, that's what I was talking about at the start. Once you actually look at the data, you realize you're looking at the same thing from different angles, and we can now come together and prevent another generation having to go through these mistakes that we had. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. So, Eric, a 38-year-old married man, writer, friend of the authors, is friendly with 3 girlfriends who broke up with him before he met his wife. He's going to write a book one day about the way women analyze men. So he has 2 working titles. One, My Wife Isn't Perfect, but I don't consider that settling, in parentheses. The other is I have no idea why she broke up with me, parentheses, but I'm married and she's still single. I'm curious if this guy actually went through with this. I'd be curious to see what he wrote, if so. Women, he said, might call 10 of their friends and discuss point by point how a guy measures up to a whole host of attributes. Then in areas he falls short, he's too messy, he's not sensitive, he doesn't make enough money. They wonder if they can fix him or train him to what they want. Men, he believes, know what you see is what you get and accept it. When we decide to marry someone, we don't think we're going to fix our wives and we don't try to change them. We don't get out the spreadsheet and break it down on a microscopic level the way the women do. We either want to be with her or we don't. Another friend Henry, who's 36, said some men are afraid of commitment. Most aren't. They want to get married just as much as women do. Often he said it's just a case of the guy not being into that woman, but it's also but also not wanting to give up the perks of the relationship. He knows he's not going to marry. He knows he's not going to marry her, Henry said. So he says, I'm not looking for anything serious right now, or I'm not sure I want to have kids, or I'm focused on my career, which he thinks is telling her that if she wants this relationship to lead to marriage, she should look elsewhere. But women think the guy is confused and she can change him. Meanwhile, the guy has made up his mind. Meanwhile, Henry continued, women can't make up their minds. Every perceived flaw is dissected for months or years until the verdict comes down whether they'll marry him. Men know early on whether they've met the person they want to marry. It's a very visceral feeling. That's why women are always flabbergasted when their commitment-phobe boyfriend goes off and gets married a year later. For all the talk about romantic love, Henry said women tend to analyze the situation too much. They're hypocritical. They say they want true love, but you'd better be this tall and make this amount of money and not have bad moods or be a real person either. He's probably right. Let's see, 2 months after my friend Julia broke up with her uninspiring boyfriend, Greg, she started dating Adam, a sexy, ambitious surgeon. Adam was all the things that Greg, her nonprofit boyfriend, wasn't, but the low-key supportive nonprofit guy was all the things her new beau wasn't. She was starting to miss Greg. I just don't know which things I can live with. She sighed as she's about to fly to Hawaii for a romantic weekend with the surgeon. But does it have to be their way? Is there a middle ground between cold analysis and intense passion? Okay. Thoughts and comments, and then there's one section left.
Again, this is where I'm wondering, like, what percent of the population really goes through this? And this is something that I would like. I'm sure many women might be towards our age, like getting past 30, who are still in this situation, would have a lot to relate with this kind of ideation. But I would be interested to hear if any of the women who did get married earlier listen to this, or if you're a younger woman, listen to this. Very few women actually listen to this content, but might increase that. If you've had similar ideation, like why were you picking on certain things? Like I'm saying, I'm thinking it's not even like first world problems. It's like for 1% of the first world problems. Is this a kind of situation where that might be the people who actually are dealing with this? I'm not saying that group doesn't deserve to be addressed and actually dealt with, but how frequent is this kind of thing? And yes, we know the divorce rate is high. The biggest thing people say, women say for divorce is I'm unsatisfied, like we talked about at the start of talking about someone's bored, uninspired. They say it just doesn't feel right anymore. They do that kind of thing. And so yeah, this is the thing. It's an ideation. It's something that I've considered and thought of before. Am I too focused on one group? Am I projecting my own issues, my own experiences on other people? Or is this a general thing? But as I mentioned, even if it is a small group, even if it is 5% of people, it's still something worth discussing. But yeah, that's a question to thought there.
And like I said, I look at my female friends also who do have boyfriends or husbands, and I sort of ask them about some of this stuff too. And as I say, I found that they're a bit more realistic. Like some of these people who end up married here. Like I have one friend who's 30 and married with 3 kids already. And like, her husband's not a picture perfect guy, but they have a good marriage. The kids turn out well. Like, they seem to be happy. So it's like, but if I were to ask her more in depth, she'd probably say, oh, I just needed these things. Like he had a certain career, he's family oriented, all this. He doesn't have to meet this like laundry list of perfect requirements. And that's why she's married and a mother. And like, it's, as far as I can tell, things are going well. In this next section here, the author interviews a bunch of her mother's friends who had married in their 20s. She interviewed them about this point about cold hard analysis versus passion. She basically said the problem is that the middle ground doesn't exist for this generation. I hear constantly from my daughter's friends that they want men to have the same emotions they do, but men and women express emotion differently. Young women expect men to be soft and caring and rich and gorgeous. They want everything. Connie, I guess another friend, just shook her head. You can wait for Prince Charming, but even Prince Charming will have holes in his socks. You can marry the most perfect person in the world and you'll still have problems to work through. But once young women see those holes, they're no longer interested. Our expectations were different. We expected to have disagreements. You didn't go into it thinking, I'll get married. If that doesn't work out, we'll get divorced. There's a sense of being a team. You were committed to working it out too. Today's girls always think they'll find something better. And with this last point, this is something my mother has said similar stuff too, by the way. Of the group, none of the moms believe in the concept of soulmate being the only person in the planet you were meant to be with. It meant someone you had a deep connection with, someone who accepts you for you, and vice versa. I think going through difficult times together makes you feel like soulmates. Working through an illness, a financial issue, a parent's death. People don't expect to work in relationships today. There have been phases of our marriage when both of us needed things at the same time, and that was very challenging. But I think a lot of women nowadays expect that they'll always get every single one of their needs met. And if they don't, something's wrong. Nothing's wrong, just in the nature of two people being in a relationship. So then the author asked what women should give up if they want to find a good mate. I don't know that you have to give up anything, but you don't start off with a negative. Women today start off with that mindset. They have to have a long list of what they want and think they just have to cross things off of it. Why not just look for someone you enjoy being with and see where it goes? Start off from a place of optimism instead of what the guy might be lacking. Another friend agrees. I have a very dear friend who has single girls. I wanted one of them to meet a young attorney who's smart and funny and donates time to kids. She Googled him, found a photo, and said he wasn't good looking enough. She wouldn't even meet him. Today's girls, yeah, girls today are stopping relationships from happening before there's even an opportunity to develop. There's a romanticized expectation of being swept off your feet from the get-go and sustaining that level of excitement, but the way love happens is over time. And that's how it happened for Connie. I didn't even like my husband when I first met him. I was working in fashion and he was schlubby. He was sort of an oddball. He asked me out and I didn't want to go out with him, but he was persistent. And as I got to know him, he not only turned out to be a wonderful guy, but he turned out to be the love of my life. The more I spoke to people about relationships, younger single women, older single women, married women, single, married men, single men, married men, etc., and women from my mother's generation, the more I found myself asking the same questions. How did the search for love get so confusing? And was this modern way of dating making women happy? That's the end of chapter 1. All right. Thoughts and comments? Yeah.
Yeah, a few things. I'll take some notes here. Okay, yeah. So first, that last one at the end, being persistent type of things. You're schlubby and things. There's a whole aspect which is like a no means no. Like somebody says no the first time, you're supposed to just leave them alone. Yeah. But I would imagine at least 50% of the people who are in relationships right now, in long-lasting relationships, did not say yes. At least we're not just. It wasn't that whole like love at first sight type of thing. That's, again, the Disney type of ideation. Yeah. So you have some people saying that no means no. Some women being told that you say no immediately and it's supposed to leave. But then some women on the other aspect say, why didn't he come back again? You said no. Means there's some messaging saying somebody says no, leave them alone. People are saying, you can't really fraternize with people at workplaces. But workplaces was the primary place people used to actually meet and get to know people. But now you can't have any. You're supposed to just have the men supposed to deal with men stuff. Women, you're not allowed to actually bring those kind of things together. And then you have the aspect of the men where they say, okay, if a woman says no the first time, drop her, the PUA type of thing. Drop her and go. Don't simp on the woman. But maybe she was in the kind of situation where if you just be persistent, you can do that. So there's some messaging out there that could be kind of breaking that apart, and it's it's tough. I don't know. I really don't know. Like I was also thinking with the situation back to the schools type of situation. I know with some of the things that I struggled on was just moving around to different continents and things like that as I'm growing up. It's trying to relearn different ways to do things in different cultures. Then looking back and okay, what culture would I want to live in? How would I want to raise kids? What are the women like in this culture? What kind of women are like this culture? What is a man like in this culture? What does a man need to do in order to achieve a level of esteem in this culture or be able to maintain enough resources, gain enough resources, have a position to give a safe environment for kids? Those are things that have troubled me my entire life, most of my life. I've become more constant with that. But now that I'm thinking with the school situation, some of that also works with kids. You go to elementary school, this is now if you're living in suburban areas. If you're living in the countryside, it's normally the same thing. The elementary school, you know the same people. High school, you know the same people. College, you normally go to college in the same area. Sometimes there's like a lot of people from your school. That pipeline is normally there. So people get more of the idea, like, I know this person when I was a kid. I still know this person when I'm 20, I'm going to marry this person. That's more constant. Yet when you live in a city, you're in your elementary school, it's in a small area. So you got maybe 100 kids in your elementary school from this small area. Middle school, it's like now 400 kids from a bigger area. So all of a sudden now you've got 4 times as many people. Then you go to college, high school, it's like 1,000 kids. Now all of a sudden more kids are in there. Then you go to colleges, people are all over the country, you're meeting all these other people. So you're being raised in an environment where it's like, okay, once you become comfortable enough with these people, all these new people come in, you're like, oh, that person's kind of a little cooler than this person. Or somebody you knew, all of a sudden you don't talk to that person anymore, you move apart. So that ideation can kind of be something that's being trained or being taught to certain kids who come from certain more like urbanized type of areas. What are your thoughts on that aspect?
Well, the part about connections taking time to develop and not love at first sight is interesting because my mother's parents were married, like I say, 62, going on 63 years. I think if my grandmother had lived till June, it would have been 63. And my grandfather actually talked about when he met my grandmother, she wasn't the prettiest woman in the room. I think you've seen pictures of posted. My grandparents were very good looking people when they were younger.
Yeah.
But my grandmother, I guess, was kind of dorky looking, and she took some time to sort of like grow into her style, develop her style, all this. But like, I mean, they dated in high school, ended up getting married. I mean, they had my mother, they were like 23 or something. So it's like, but it sort of describes what they're saying here, how a lot of these long lasting marriages, it's not fireworks, love at first sight, the music plays and everything slows down. And I think that's the problem, is that some of these people, more so women, they sort of expect things to play out like that. They expect that to continue. Then when it doesn't, they complain, oh, this is boring, I'm looking for something better. But in reality, it's like, no, these connections take time to develop. And then the other thing about saying no to people I find kind of interesting, because the host of the Roommates talked a bit about this, how the show actually started because he actually moved to another city because he was pursuing this woman. And I think he pursued her for something like 5 years, and she ended up saying no to him anyway. Yeah. So I sort of see both sides of this, because it's like, it's one thing to not give up, but there's also a certain point where you have to realize the person's not interested in you, and that if you keep pursuing them, you're wasting your own time because they're not going to change. And I think people do waste a lot of time and energy, on people that aren't interested in them. Because I thought about this in my own life. Like, there were a bunch of girls that I was really into that had no interest in me. And like, if I had spent time working on myself or pursuing girls that were interested, how much better it would have been. And the host of the show said the same thing about himself. He's like, I have a good show now, I make good money and all this, but imagine if I had spent a lot of that time developing myself further, like, I'd have even more viewers, I'd have even more money, I'd be in better physical shape, and then like that point, I'd have even more to offer, and then I could get more of the women that I want. So I think about some of that stuff too. And that's why my friend who I was talking about earlier seems to pursue guys based on looks. I was basically saying, I'm like, if you're interested in this one guy, I think you should make a move or like make it clear. Cause I'm like, if you keep following him, if he eventually says no, you're going to be crushed. Cause I mean, I've been there myself, and it's like, as your friend, I want you to succeed, but it's like, I also don't want you to waste all your time and energy on a guy who's not interested, because again, it's like, you could either pursue someone else, or you could develop yourself in some way, or develop a hobby, or like something that in the longer run would benefit you a lot more, rather than just chasing a guy hoping you're going to win him over when it's not really worth it. So.
Yeah, in my experience, I've had this thing where I see something in one place and I think, like, oh, when I go back to this other place, it's not going to be like that at all. Like, and then I end up going back. My first thing was, I went to school in West Virginia, small towns area. I was like, okay, this place, there's a lot of people who don't know things about other cultures, other societies, things like that. But it's more like an ignorance thing because they live in a certain bubble. I talked about that pipeline where it's like they see the same person, live in the same town, know the same 150 or so people their whole lives. And then I was like, okay, when I go back to DC area, people will be so metropolitan, but no, they live in their own bubbles. And I've noticed that those bubbles are actually even more enforced because you're meeting the same kind of people from many different locations. So you start thinking that's even wider. At least the people in West Virginia are like, okay, this is how West Virginia is. I'm happy with West Virginia, but there's less chance for them to assume that Texas is like that too, that Oregon is like that too, because they understand, I think it's like this because I've only been here. But if you travel around the world, seeing people in different places, then you're more likely to think, okay, it's just like this everywhere in the world, when that's not really the case.
Yeah.
So one thing that's happened with that is this kind of situation of saying, like, okay, I think this is the sort of person that I'll be with. And then you notice that, okay, this is something that is a lot more common with, like, say, okay, this is what I want for somebody, and they actually see, like, then they actually notice that this is not necessarily what they want. You see those kind of things happening a lot, where people get ultra focused onto something, and they don't necessarily see the fact that they're as unforgiving, that they're limiting themselves out of actually getting into. I don't know. Because we say, okay, somebody's focused on that. They say, okay, this is somebody, like, I'm going to be focused on this person. I'm going to put all my eggs in this basket. I'm going to focus this person. I'm going to keep doing it. But in that also aspect, you haven't actually presented who you are. If you're confident with who you are as a person, then wouldn't you also say, if I've presented who I am in as clear a way as I can, and they're still saying no, then I should kind of bail out from this. And then go ahead.
And that was kind of the point with my friend, because it's like, if she's going for guys just because she thinks they're good looking and hoping to win them over, but they're not interested in her, it's like, well, if you've talked to them a bunch of times, you should kind of get an inkling for that, because it's not like, okay, this guy gave a lecture somewhere and you talked to him afterwards and you and he clicked well, then he asked to take you out and then you spent a day together. Like, it's not like that. It's more, you see him and you think he's good looking and you can hope that you can work that into something. But it's like, if you're kind of flirting with him and he's either kind of cold or ignoring, it's like, at some point, it's like, again, I don't see the interaction, so I can't really like judge for myself. But there's also a certain point where it's like, if he, after a certain while, if the guy knows you're interested, he's going to reciprocate. Like, if he's interested too, he's going to reciprocate. If not, it's like, he may be not interested, or you may just not be making it clear. He may, because there are people who get anxiety and they try to flirt, but it's awkward and people think, oh, they're just being friendly. So there is that aspect too. But that was my point to her about, like, you have to make it clear, especially sooner than later, because like, I don't want this to build up for a long time, and then if he were to finally say no to you, you're just going to be devastated. Then you spent all that time and energy, So it's like, I think the intentions have to be clear. And it took me some time to learn this too. Like, are women being friendly? Are they flirty? Some women are just flirty because they like the validation. Like, it's funny. My friend, her, actually, there was a funny time when I was hanging out with her and some other friends, and my friend asked her, "Why don't you date Steven?" You know what her answer was?
What?
She said, "He's too nerdy for me." And so, like, ever since then, I keep bringing it up and laughing about it. And the thing is, she still flirts. The thing is, she still flirts with me. But the thing is, I know she doesn't want anything with me. It's just like she likes the attention or whatever. So it's like, people have to take those kind of things into consideration too. Like, I've had other female friends like that they're just flirty, but like, they're not actually trying to get with the guy. I think they just like the idea of like, oh, these men are giving me positive attention, and so. Yeah.
And that is one of the things where, as you were mentioning, where women have kind of changed, where in general, historically, that wasn't something that you didn't even have the venue to be flirtatious in that kind of sense. But in addition, now women are being empowered to have the sexual liberation and be flirty and be more out with that. But they still don't take on things like, how many women have actually asked a guy out? Like you're talking about the one friend we mentioned, following that person. Why isn't she coming out and clearly saying, I am attracted to you, do you want to date? Women are still very apprehensive to that. They're like, oh, you still have to actually be the first one. I've seen something like Bumble, where apparently now it's like the women who initiate, but still women are only initiating with the same figures. Yes, it's different on OkCupid. They get 1,000 messages and then they only talk to like the top 20% of things like that. It's a similar thing in Bumble. They're initiating, but they're still only initiating with even probably a smaller percent of the actual men that's actually in there, because they don't get the notification unless you like double swipe, I think. But that kind of thing, I was thinking, when I was here in Kenya, when I first got back, I was hanging out with one friend. Unfortunately, she's passed away since then. But she was more of like a modern woman. She was a lawyer. She was out and about. She was breaking a lot of the different traditional type of things that women from her tribe would have done. But I started talking about the marriage, and she's like, no, when I get married, the man still has to ask, he still has to pay the bride price, he still has to do all these traditional things. I'm like, but you're not a traditional woman, so how come you're saying the man still has to do all these things from the past? And I thought that was, maybe that's just in Kenya. But then, as you mentioned, it's a similar thing that we see in the West, where women have all these new abilities and these new functions, and they're doing all these things, getting into these men's spaces. But when it comes to relationships, they regress back to the ideation of the chivalry. Chivalry's dead. We need the man to be doing. The man needs to earn more. The man needs to take the lead. The man needs to do this. It's a situation where I think we need that time, as I mentioned, with the men looking at the past and the women looking at the future, and coming to an understanding. But
chivalry is dead. Long live chivalry. That could be a new slogan.
there's a short comic. Short animation I'm trying to work on with the whole chivalry thing. But with this, we've talked about different conversations. This one, we'll continue this conversation, of course, in other parts, and it might actually even open up and try to release these at least once a week. It might even open up to have some of these female friends up, come on and talk. Because with the I Know Great People series, one of the people I want to have on is you know him as well. I think your friend's name on Facebook. I don't know if I think you met. He came over to visit, I think, sometime when he was still in New York. Stan. I don't know if you remember Stan. Like
Maybe if I
ski, like tall blonde. Like,
oh yeah,
looks like
yeah,
an
I remember.
Ubermensch. Yeah.
Yeah, I
well,
remember now.
well, he married Silky, and they lived somewhere else. Now they just moved to West Virginia and they bought a house, and they're in their 20s. And I wanted them on the I Know Great People series. He's penciled in to come and tell us, because as I mentioned, a lot of people still do get married. And he was living in New York City. I think he's a first generation American. I think she's multi generation American, but they met in their 20s in New York City, got together, decided they loved each other, moved out because they're like, this is not a good place. They were focused on, we're raising kids, but they met through a philosophy group, the Free Domain group. So they were focused on like knowing self-knowledge. Tell the person you're dating with what you want. This is for kids. This is what we want to have in the future. And now they already have a kid. They bought a home. They're in their 20s. They're living in West Virginia, moved from a bigger city. So this is like the kind of promising thing where I'm saying like this thing still exists. And I think majority of the people are still have that open to it. We're single not because like we didn't have any chances to not be single younger, but we made certain decisions. All these people that you've talked about so far, they're not just like, oh, I never dated anyone. They were with people and left. And those people, some of them still know them and see that those people actually were good enough to be in working relationships with other people. So it's not like those people were just like broken. It's not like these people were like, oh, I broke up with this guy, now he's in jail. He's like an axe murderer. It's like I broke up with this person, now he's like got a wife and kids and he's doing really well. And they still know him. It's pretty cool. So yeah. I think most of the people who are single, you're not a broken person, but the way you've been approaching relationships is probably broken. And in many cases, it's not entirely your fault. But for many of you, you can probably find ways to kind of rehabilitate yourself and still have some hope for the future. Like I still have hope for the future, despite all the mistakes and misgivings I've had in the past.
And that's why I'm a little critical of my friend who I've been talking about in this, because it's like I feel like she always blames the men. And for me, I'm like, I don't believe that the men were at fault 100% of the time. Like, look, I've made plenty of mistakes. I've gone for girls based purely on physical attraction. I got attached to girls who were no interested in me. I moved too quickly. I moved too slowly. I passed up girls who were right. Like I can go through my past and look at each thing I did wrong and own up to it, but I also learned things from that. But I feel like the way she talks, it's always the men who are at fault. And it's like, if I were to take a time machine, go back and look, I don't think that would be the case. So I just feel like if you're blaming men 100% of the time, like I don't believe that to be the case, unless you're going for very low quality men every single time. But then why are you going for those men? I mean, that just raises that question. So
yeah. And I think that's a good point. I think, as you mentioned, that's a good thing. If you personally are much older and you feel you're an incel, involuntarily single, look back at your history, and are the people you broke up with still single? And even on top of that, are the people that you broke up with in relationships that at least from the little that you know look positive? Because there's some people, as we mentioned in passing, which I don't even want to really discuss this too much, because I doubt too many people who are in those kind of abusive relationships would be listening to this kind of content. I think the stuff that we make isn't general enough that if somebody's in an abusive relationship, their probably mentality would have selected themselves out of listening to this a lot earlier. But look back and say, is this person somebody that, if you can see that they actually are in functional relationships, then yes, maybe you had the right kind of radar out there, but there was something that was not fitting. But if you see these people are also in broken relationships, then you're probably looking for just an entirely wrong sort of person, and that's something you can kind of consider yourself. And I'm trying to think, okay, the people that have actually, with the moving around, not having a position, that thing has been a big, major step in my life where I haven't really seriously dated anyone in, probably decades. Really, like, listen, almost a decade, almost 2 decades. Like it's been a while since I've actually had like a relationship where like this is somebody that I'm actually trying to work something with. So once I start getting but the people I've had crushes on or had certain attraction to, I think all those people are married, but then I never really actually considered that much. So that's something that's different with me. I don't know how I would apply that to my life, but I think that can be something that some people can apply. But
yeah. I mean, I don't have much else to say. I mean, again, that's chapter 1. We got a ways to go. Like I say, the other chapters will probably be shorter because it's like I'll try to think about like I'll obviously listen to this and think about like what things am I not going to bring up again because we already said it, just so we can streamline this a little better. But a lot of good research in this book. I was really impressed at all the different types of people she interviewed, and it was cool that they agreed to participate on this because I think a lot of this is really valuable information. I think this is the kind of stuff that I wish women in their early 20s would read. I mean, a lot of guys too, for that matter. I mean, there could even be a male equivalent. Someone could write a male equivalent of this too. So I just think that these are very honest, frank conversations that need to be had, because there have been so many lies pushed in the culture by media, academics, journalists, whoever, who want to sell you things, who want you to act a certain way, and it's done a lot of harm. And I think we need to work on correcting it. Yeah.
And that's another thing. Again, a lot of these people are relatively unhappy people.
Yeah.
That's something, I mean, the lived experience is there. Yes, you don't have to be in shape to give good advice about exercise and diet, but many people who truly believe what they're saying will actually do that. And you just wonder, like, why do you apply? Like, I saw this like meme where it's like, oh, me applying, like, me giving people advice, and it's like that smiley face, and me living by my own advice, like dark kind of face.
Yeah.
I know there is that aspect where there's an ability to do that. Like, you have a job, the things you say at your job are not necessarily things that you do in life. So I get that, but in many cases, some of the people pushing out these things that have been harmful to other people are also not that happy themselves. I don't know why somebody in a happy relationship would give advice about not being in a happy relationship. And that's something I see. People who are happy, you can be happy by yourself. And I think being happy for yourself is one of the prerequisites to actually find somebody that's also happy in and of themselves, and you can be happy together. But I personally do not believe the joys you can have from friendship, let alone the sort of friendship that's close enough to start a new life, can be something that's surpassed by living by yourself. Maybe if you're like Tesla and you invent like world-changing things, maybe there's some things like that. But finding somebody you truly are comfortable with, that you can start a new life with, is probably the greatest thing the average human being can do. And it's a disservice that there's so much negative, unnecessarily avoidable things out there that are impeding many quality and good people from actually achieving that. Yeah.
Sure. All right. I mean, that's all I have for now. So. Yeah.
All right. Till next time. This has been Silas. Say what's up. Say goodbye, I guess.
Goodbye, everyone. See you soon.
Okay. Goodbye.